Judaism is not only about us in our generation, it's building other generations of Jews with these values.
Welcome to Rebbi, I Have a Question, a podcast from Chappelle's and Midreshet Rachel V'Chaya. I'm your host, Donna Margolis, and in each episode, I sit down with Rabbi Yitzchak Shurin to explore one question sent in by a student or an alumna, questions about family, relationships, identity, and the lifelong journey of becoming a Torah Jew. With over 4 decades of guiding students, Rabbi Shurin brings Torah wisdom from our sages, life experience, and the teachings of his grandfather, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky Zatzal, to some of the most sensitive and personal issues we face. You may be surprised by what you hear. Let's begin. Hi, Rabbi Shurin.
Hi, how's it going, Donna?
Good. It's good to be back with you again.
You're right. Okay, you should have a Gemar Chasima Torah.
Thanks, and wishing all of our listeners exactly the same thing.
Exactly.
Okay, so Rabbi, today's question is, when I became religious, I fought so hard for what I felt was right. But now the life I imagined hasn't turned out the way that I thought. Meanwhile, my siblings who didn't make the same religious choices seem to be thriving. Their children are happy, balanced, and well-rounded, while my family is what feels like struggling a little. Sometimes I even wonder, what did I fight so hard for? So,
Wow.
Rabbi Shurin, let's start with this.
Okay.
Okay. So when someone chooses a religious life, I think they often imagine a certain outcome, like that it's going to be joyful, they'll have fulfillment from it, maybe even stability. But what happens when reality doesn't exactly match the dream that we fought so hard for?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. So just at your introduction, that was a little bit more on the family-oriented side, right? Your introduction. I think we have to really talk about the family-oriented side, and we have many single men and women that's not relevant for yet. I just want to say, in most cases, this is just a hara or I want asterisk to this, is that the vast majority of our students at Chappelle's, the vast majority, I'm talking probably over 90%, do get married and do have children. Okay, there's Baruch Hashem, there's exceptions to these rules, but I'm talking about the norm is that the vast majority do get married. So we'll talk about this, because even though they will get married, there are struggles, right? And we have to mention those struggles and talk about them. Okay. But let's begin by, they were told about this joy, fulfillment, stability. They were told about it probably by the Kiruv rabbi. And I think to an extent, the students that we have had, that I have had at Midreshet Rachel, have found this to be true, that even as, single women, I'm not talking about the challenges of getting older, but the single women have found joy, fulfillment, and stability in their becoming observant. So when you say that, it doesn't really match, it doesn't match the dream we fought so hard for, so that sounds like there were difficulties in life that came up, and they couldn't have this joy anymore, or this fulfillment or stability that they had at the beginning, because of the challenges that came up in their lives. And I'm not going to try to whitewash that. There are, people have difficulties in life. I think that's one of the reasons why, if you're in the Hasidic world, they always mention the Reb Zusha, right? Who had an extremely difficult life, right? And when people ask the Mezritcher Maggid, right, how are you happy when you're having, when you have so many challenges in your life? And the Mezritcher Maggid said, don't ask me that question. I didn't have that. You have to go to Reb Zusha for that question, because he's living a life of Yisurim, of tremendous amount of emotional pain, and he's so poor and everything. I think he could probably answer that question much better. And by the way, I just want to think parenthetically, Donnie, you'll be very helpful here, because I didn't grow up as the Baal Tshuva. So I have to send it to you more when we talk about the baalei teshuva. So I'm hoping that you'll help me out over here. But when they go to Reb Zusha, all these people with serious, challenges in life, and Yisurim, and, families. And by the way, in the time of the Baal Shem Tov and there were families, children that really went off. It wasn't so easy at that time in Eastern Europe, where the Baal Shem Tov lived in the Mezritch Magnet. So they go to, of course, the Reb Zusha, and they say to him, like, Rebbe, the Rebbe sent me to ask you, like, how do you maintain your faith and your joy when your life is so difficult? And of course, he says to them, I don't know what you're talking about. My life's not difficult. You have to go to somebody else.
Wow.
Right. So in other words, what Reb Zusha was really saying, I don't think Reb Zusha was under the impression he was really, really wealthy and he didn't have any problems. I don't think he was like a La La Land. I think he was really saying is that, life is difficult. There's no question about it. But we have to be able to find the joy in Judaism. I thought Pikain. And personally, I don't think it's so hard to do. In other words, Judaism is a life that was sent to us by God, right? I always call it the manual that you get when you buy your computer or your fridge, which we unfortunately never look at, right? But we have a manual, and that manual gives us a life of real meaning, right? And a meaningful life, generally, if you ask the secular psychologists, usually leads to a very happy life. Even though there's plenty of challenges, there is no life without challenges. If someone became observant because they didn't want challenges, it's the wrong reason.
That's exactly what I was going to say. So to summarize, it sounds like what you're saying to me is that becoming more observant and thinking that that's going to take away life's challenges is really a mistaken premise. It's right. You're going to have challenges in life, whether you are religious or not religious, observant, not observant. However, there is the sense that with a more observant life also does come the certain benefits that baalei teshuva were exposed to when they were first introduced to a more religious lifestyle.
Correct. And again, if they have the proper attitude towards religion, they will feel joy even in the time when they're going through very difficult times. They'll feel the joy of Judaism as being like you said, you said over here, the stability of the life. You're not groping in the dark. That there's a plan here and there's a journey here that we know, we because we have that, that book that we call the Torah that gives us answers to our questions or allows us to have certain fulfillment even while we're going through, a certain life. I want to tell you something interesting that's very relevant for October 7th, because I've seen more than one interview of people saying, who were hostages and they were completely secular. And at that time, all of a sudden, the only thing that they had in their life was God. Because without God, they felt like what am I just doing? I'm just sitting here. So they called out to God because of this. So actually at the most difficult times in their life, and there's no question that for these people, they went through the most difficult time in their life in captivity. There's no question about it. But that's where they found God. And there's interview after interview. Now, some of them are not so observant, they didn't become Hasidic masters, but they really felt that they brought God into their life through that. right? So when you don't have God in your life, who do you complain to when you're not feeling the joy or the fulfillment, stability, right? If you don't have God, you have no one to complain to. You just sit there. But if you do have God, you could complain to God and say, God, help me out over here. I know I'm living a meaningful life, but it's really difficult. I'm going through a difficult time now, and help me out here. And you have someone to complain to. And I always tell my students, if you don't feel you could daven to God, feel you could complain to God. Right? That's extremely important, that we feel there's somebody listening. Or Soloveitchik always said, right? We say at the end, Baruch Atah Hashem shomea tefillah. He hears our tefillah. It doesn't say mekabel et tefillah. He hears the tefillah. That we know. We could complain to God, right? And take out our emotional difficulties. Our heart is in pain. And we could say to God, listen, God, you got to do something for us, right? And a lot of times, I have to tell you, sometimes it can take a good few years. God does come through. And I mentioned this, that a lot of my single students who felt that, God forgot about me. All my friends are married, right? And, I'm already in my 30s. That's always that age, I'm freezing my eggs already. And my girlfriends got married in their mid to late 20s, and they didn't have to freeze their eggs, right? And at the end of the day, right, a lot of these people, I would say the vast majority, did get married. They have happy marriages, right? And they actually had children as well, So sometimes, where we say 2020 is, hindsight is 2020. Right. And a lot of times you'll see people like really being frustrated and complaining. But after everything plays out, when they look back, they say, I don't know why, I didn't have enough of emunah to be able to say, God, you know what you're doing. I'm leaving it to you. Right. That's not so easy.
Right. I want to just go back for a minute to what
Sure.
you said before about Shomea Tefillah, that God hears our tefillot, our prayers. And you said he's not always mekabel, he doesn't always receive them, but he also doesn't always answer them.
Right.
Or
That's
in
what
the way that
Soloveitchik
we
says.
want.
He
That's what
says that
Rabbi-
exactly too. He
So
says
if that's
God doesn't,
true, yeah, go ahead.
God doesn't always answer our tefillot,
Yeah.
but you really have somebody that's really listening. It's not,
Okay, good, but let's dig a little deeper in that.
Right.
Okay. So we hear that, and that can either be reassuring or very difficult. How do we hold on to that faith and that commitment that we made when we feel let down? Not even necessarily by God, but by the reality of what our religious life looks like. Like
Meaning,
either Mhm.
go ahead,
maybe
good.
we're not married, or maybe, we saw people at the Shabbos, we went to people's Shabbos tables and their kids sat around the table like little angels listening to their father's Divrei Torah, and our kids are throwing food at each other and don't care. Or I would say, when people get a little bit older and their children are older, and we think everybody else's kids are jumping out of bed at the first opportunity to run to Minyan in the morning, and our kid is sleeping and we're throwing water on him to wake him up and he's not getting up and going, right? These kind of things that seem to us to not really be working the way that we thought they were going to be working. So how do we hold on to that faith and commitment that we made at the beginning when things aren't working out?
So look, I do think, whether we're talking about marriage and kids, right, or we're talking about singles, right, we have to realize that we're very much into immediate satisfaction. And I don't mean immediate like today, right? I mean immediate in the next, 4 or 5 months. I remember when I first started teaching at Chappelle's, like probably 1981, 1982, and a guy came to me. He said, he was very frustrated that he wasn't married. He was already in his 30s. He said, Rabbi Shurin, I was able to plan everything in my life. I planned school. I knew what I majored in. I planned my life as far as what I'd be working in what field, right? And now with marriage, I planned it. I said I'm going to be married at 26, and now I'm in my 30s, not married. It's extremely frustrating for a person that makes those types of plans. And I hear it. But the truth is that a lot of times it's not going to work according to our schedule, right? Especially, I said to him, especially with you're looking for a wife, she's not going to work according to your schedule because, she has her own schedule, so, you're looking for this wife, and why aren't they getting married? It depends also on the other person. They have to say yes, right? So we do have a lot of that in life. And a lot of times we have frustrations when things don't work out and we're dating and dating and dating. And if God could tell that person, listen, it's that person that you're supposed to marry is not here yet, right? But don't get frustrated and marry the wrong person, because that does happen. Because again, we can't blame God for everything. In other words, if you make a bad choice because you wanted to be married, and by the way, I've had this where a woman said to me, all my friends got married, so I decided I have to get married. And even though I wasn't sure about this guy, I said yes, because all my friends are married, and they told me you have to be married. And Judaism is a religion that deals a lot with family. And of course, this particular person got divorced, and only in her second marriage, when she got married for the right reason, she was looking to find the right person for her, not to just, fit into the Jewish religion. She was very happy. She had kids with that person, and they have a beautiful family and stuff. So in other words, we can't make decisions, for God. God has a plan here. We are on a journey, and God has a plan. And sometimes our journey doesn't fit his plan exactly, and we just have to be patient. But we always say to our kids, just be patient. Give me another 2 minutes. I'll be with you. I'm on the phone, and the kid can't give it to you, right? So we're bigger kids that, can't, we don't have the patience that we need to have. And sometimes we really need, and that's when we say emunah, that's another word for patience. In other words, I have faith in God. He knows what's good for me. I'm not going the normal route. I admit that, Donna. There's the normal route. When you get married, 2 years after you become a baalei teshuva, 3 years, you get married. Okay, that's the normal route. But and I know so many men and women that couldn't take that normal route. And there is that not normal route in life. And sometimes it's in the marriage world. Sometimes it's in the children world. How many times did I have students who called me and said, Rabbi Shurin, I'm married 3 years without children, and I'm going nuts, right? And at the end, 20 years later, the woman has 6 children, right? So we do have this, you got to just be patient. You may not be the norm of, what is the norm. Your journey is different than everyone else's journey or most people's journey. But I have to tell you, there's very few people that I know that had that longer journey but didn't become happily married or didn't have children, right? There are, of course, exceptions to the rule, and I can't tell you why God chose that. But I do know that God did choose that. In other words, he said, for you, we need something else than for somebody else, right? And we just have to be patient. And even though we do our hishtadlus, and we have to make sure we're not jumping the gun, which a lot of people do, and then they're upset about, the choices that they made. And at the end of the day, it is your choice, Donna. It's your choice. You have to make sure if you're not sure about the guy or that you're going to be marrying, if you're not sure if that's the right guy, you have to talk it over with people, talk it over with mentors, talk it over with other baalei teshuva who have happily marriages, have been happily married, right? And it doesn't, to me, have to be this rabbi or this rebbitzin. It has to be people who have lived life before you. And in fact, if they're baalei teshuva, it's probably better because they're going to be able to tell you what life is like being a baalei teshuva and raising a family. And we know that's not exactly the same way that the from birth world works. So, I always say, like, Esther and I had 10 kids, and there's Baruch Hashem many grandchildren, and there's uncles and aunts, who can always be helpful when you need to call them up, and they're the generation before you. The Baal Tshuva doesn't have that. And that is something we really have to take into account. So who has to become family for them? Their mentors, other baalei tshuva, that their friends that they had in Midrash Rachel, at Chappelle's, right? They have to take advantage of that, because that is really, when we talk about, I hate to advertise, when we talk about the Darchei Noam family, I mean it very literal, right? That is your family in many instances. Like a lot of times baalei tshuva say, I can't call my mom. And I sometimes tell them, don't call your mom, because of course, what is she going to say? Your mom and dad are going to say, we told you so. Why did you do this? Right? So you really need to talk to people who have gone through it, somewhat older than you, but nonetheless, they know what you're feeling because they have gone through it, and, bring it up to them, your frustrations and stuff. But I do feel, go ahead.
I just want to add to that, because it's such an important point, that very often baalei tshuva end up feeling alone.
Correct.
Because exactly like you said, they don't have brothers and sisters that are going through challenges with their own situations in life or their own children. They didn't necessarily even go through the same challenges that their own kids are going through, because they weren't raised the same way that their children are being raised. And I'll add another layer of complication. That layer of complication goes back to the original question here, is that this is something that many people fought so hard for. So when you fight hard for something, it's also very difficult to admit when things aren't going exactly the way that they thought they were going to go. So very often people end up going through challenging periods in their life, feeling very much alone, and in fact, not opening up to their friends or to their mentors or to their own family, because it's almost like they have something to prove to justify what they fought so hard for.
Right. You're right. They feel that way. They really feel they have to justify it, and it had to work out. And I feel in most cases, it does work out. And I want to add something, if we're talking already about family. But again, I want to stress that in every community that I've seen, whether it's Passaic, whether it's Silver Spring, whether it's Houston, Texas, even today, or Florida, there are other baalei tshuva who have lived life 20 years before you. And they could be extremely helpful. Okay. And there are mentors that know the Baal Tshuva world. They could be extremely helpful because they've seen so many different, baalei tshuva families and stuff, that they could really be helpful. And these are the people that they should be going to. And if I hate to use the word, and complaining about, what their lives are like. But I want to say, at the end of the day, I'd be surprised when someone tells me I didn't feel any fulfillment in my Judaism. I would be shocked. It's such a meaningful life, our Shabbat, our family, right? That I don't see in the secular world. I do see it, but very, very rarely I see in the secular world. And I want to mention that Charlie Kirk, if I'm allowed to say, Zichrono Livracha, right? He himself said, I learned what Shabbat is from the Orthodox world. So how could the Baal Tshuva say, like, I don't get anything out of Shabbat? Here's this non-Jew who, like, turned his cell phone off on Shabbat because he wanted to be there for his kids. And I've heard from so many baalei tshuva that said, when I was secular, we never had a meal together. Never. 7 days a week. It was maybe on Thanksgiving, we had a meal together, right? Maybe on New Year's, but we never had a meal. And here you see in Judaism, it's built in to have, family time, to be there for the kids. And I see religious from birth or baalei tshuva having in a sense, it's a struggle, but I see them always having this consciousness, I got to be there for my family. Oh, I got to work late tonight. No, but I have family. In the secular world, they're not thinking that. Even if they have family, I got to work late tonight, period. No, it's always a struggle in the frum world. Am I giving enough time for my family? I got to get home. Even if I have to go out tonight, I got to give my family an hour, right? Because we know how important that is. And the kids appreciate it very, very much.
Okay, so then on that, let's go to the questioner's question. Okay, because one of the things that it was a woman, a student of yours, that wrote to me, and what she's struggling with is that she's looking around at her siblings or friends, like people that she grew up with, and it looks like their families are successful, their kids are happy, they get along, and she feels a little bit jealous because she fought for these choices, right? And she's looking around and she's seeing that, it's working out pretty good for all these other people. And they are getting to go out and eat at the restaurants with the grandparents and send their kids to all kinds of after school activities. And the kids are growing up happy and they get along and they even have good meetos, she said. So how do you answer that?
Look, I don't think, first of all, I don't think that statistically that happens very much, but it does happen. I've heard it from a number of my students that it does happen. But more what I've heard from my students over the years is that I have kids, I gave my parents grandchildren, and my brothers and sisters either didn't get married or didn't have kids. That's what mostly happens. Every now and then you get a traditional family. I'm saying a secular traditional family. And I think they have their head screwed on straight. And they have the traditions. In other words, it's almost like Avram Avinu. He had to discover Judaism on his own. He didn't have a Torah. He didn't have a guidebook that he could open up and do. But he did discover it. Okay, let's remember that. He discovered Judaism on his own, and he brought it into his life very much. Okay, so these families, some of these very conservative, traditional, we'll call it, even I don't mean traditional in Judaism way, but traditional family and traditional values, they will have this because to me, as I said, Charlie Kirk was Machavin. He figured out that, you know what? A traditional family is what brings meaning in life. And therefore, I'm going to discover traditional things and do them, right? And it could be there are families like that, okay? And what I have to say about that is kol hakavod that they have families like that. And it doesn't even mean to me that I have to be in a race with them. We have to race, and my kids have to be better than their kids because my kids are frum. I don't think it has to be that way. I think if they have traditional values, right, what they are missing is a Torah lifestyle. And we can never forget about that. Because at the end of the day, God gave the Jews a mission, okay? And the mission was to be Torah Jews, okay? It never meant that you can't, keep Shev Mitzvahs B'nai Noach and not have a nice family. Is that what we really were looking for? Like, I'm religious. I hope everybody else around, their families are in disarray. Chas v'shalom. I didn't want that, right? I just knew that we, as a chosen people, have a mission in life that nobody else has. We're supposed to be a light unto nations. We're supposed to be teaching the world what good values are, what good midos are. If other people have it, that's great, right? But unfortunately, most of the world is really not like that, right? Every now and then you have a student that has a sibling or two siblings that are doing the right thing, right? But I have to tell you, at the end of the day, if it's not Judaism and it's just traditional values, how many generations will that go? Right? In other words, we have to not forget that Judaism is not only about us in our generation. It's building other generations of Jews with these values because we see that the Jewish people are a very special nation. Even amongst the secular Jews, right? We see that if they have certain values still that are Jewish values, right? And they may not even know it. They just sort of inherited it, right? They have, I'll give you an example of it. We have in the Jewish world, the kids are very educated. So either they're very educated in Judaism or they've gone to great universities, right? University of Michigan, University of Wisconsin, Harvard University, right? Princeton, right? I personally believe that all comes from Judaism because kids at age 5 or 6 were brought into school and taught how to read when nobody knew how to read. In the Middle Ages, the Catholics didn't know how to read. It's only the priests that knew how to read and the nuns, right? By us, every little kid knew how to read when it was illiteracy was like rampant in the world, right? So the fact that the Jews, the secular Jews talk about, I sent my kids to university. I happen to know that you sent your kids to university because we have a Torah that talks about educating chanoch lanar al pi darko, right? That's why you have it. So, okay, that's great that they have those values, and I'm very happy. To the contrary, I am very happy when I see a secular Jewish family that has traditional values and that sort of look somewhat like Judaism. That's great, but it's not going to last. That's what I have to tell you, Donna. It's not going to last. Unfortunately, I wish it will, but it's not going to last. Kids marry out, right? 70 or 80% of the kids are marrying out, and that there goes Judaism. All those values are much harder to keep when that happens. Whereas when you look at, these people can't say it because let's say the people who write to us, a lot of them are not even grandparents yet, right? But you watch. I forget the name of that movie star that was a great movie star. And at the end of his life, he became Hasidish. He was completely secular. He starred, I think, in Mission Impossible. Right. So I forget his name, but probably people listening here will know, right? He became frum on the set in LA, right? And he made people crazy. Friday night, he used to say when Shabbos was coming in, good, I got to leave. And the producer and director would go crazy, okay? Or it's getting late. I got to daven mincha, and there's at least 10 secular Jews here, because in Hollywood there was always secular, and he would make a minyan, He would say Kaddish, and he'd make a minyan, right? Eventually, they actually they dismissed him out of Hollywood because he made so many problems for them, but they took him back. I think there was a program about lawyers in the last 20 years. I forget the name of it, something law or something. And they brought him back because he was such a great movie star. But you see the last time when he's already, I think, close to 90, you see how he's dancing at his grandson's bar mitzvah with the whole garb. He's got the Chassidish garb on, and he's dancing, and the joy on his face, you could get it on YouTube. It's kedai to see it. It's kedai to just look how happy and content he was with life because of that. I don't think in the secular world that you'll have that. It'll be so rare to have such a thing. We're building new generations of Jews to keep our beautiful nation alive and vibrant, right? That's not happening in the secular world. I just want to say, Donna, that, I know when, so many times we bring up this issue, or my students bring up, the alumni bring up the issue of, we look at the rest of our family that's secular and they're really doing really well. And we're struggling because we send our kids to yeshiva and it's so expensive and everything. And, we can't go on the same trips because of Shabbos, and we can't eat at all the different restaurants that they eat all over the world, right? So I want to tell you, they're not alone, Donna. They're not alone. Mm-hmm. This is already in the Torah. And I want to tell you over something from my Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Hutner, and Rav Soloveitchik. Right? They both, interesting enough, say the same thing about a certain parsha. But I want to begin with the question. On Rosh Hashanah, which we just had, if you noted, we read the parsha of the Akedah, okay? The Akedah being the great nisayon for Avram Avinu and Sarah. This was the greatest test that they were put to, right? And we read about it, and Avram Avinu keeps his loyalty to God, even though he was promised that Yitzchak would be, his offspring, and then God, so to speak, reneges on it, right? And it shows you that even the most difficult times, Avram Avinu holds his own. I'm certain it wasn't easy for Avram. But at the end, the Baal Korah keeps reading, right, till the end of Parshas Vayera, and Rav Soloveitchik or Footner asked a similar question here. It was after this time, after this whole Akedah, that Avram was told, Avram got word that his brother also had children, and it goes through, Avram had one child and Yishmael, and it goes through many, many children, and then it says he had a Pelegish that had children as well, right? This has nothing to do, Rav Soloveitchik and Rav Hutner say, with the Akedah. It has nothing to do with the Nisayon of Avram Avinu, right? So why do we read it on Rosh Hashanah? We have enough psukim to stop at Pasuk Yud Chet, right? Mm-hmm. Why do we continue on? Are we just trying to finish off the parsha? It makes no sense. So they said an unbelievable chiddush. Part of the Nisayon of Avram Avinu going to the Akedah with Yitzchak and practically almost losing his child, right? Part of the Nisayon was then afterwards hearing about Nochar living in Haran. His kids, he has kids, they're doing really well. They're making a good living. I'm sure his kids went to universities, right? And Avram Avinu is this one child he almost lost. And he thinks to himself, wait, God, I left Haran because you told me to. I went to Israel and I had so many different trials and tribulations in Israel. And finally I have a child that you promised me, and then you almost renege on it, right? Do you know what kind of pain that causes for somebody? How so much pain that Avram Avinu went through, whereas he looks at Nochar, and exactly what many of my students say. I look at my brother and sister, and they're having a great time, and I'm having all these challenges and this big journey in Judaism, right? And then, of course, that's part of the saying. But what happens is, from that family of Nochar, right, the only ones who remain are the three baalei teshuva, the Rivka, Rachel, and Leah, right? In the next generation, it's Rachel and Leah, right? Why do they survive? Because they marry into Avram Avinu's family. They became part of Avram Avinu's family. Do you know anything else about Kesher, Chazo, Pildush, Yidlaf? Do you know anything about them? The ones we know about for 3,000 years, we're talking about the Imahot, Rachel Mavakal Baneha. We talk about Leah. We talk about Rivka. Those people who married into Avram Avinu's family, they're alive and well in our world today. Alive and well. Nachar's family ended with Nachar, with the family. That's it. We know nothing about them, right? And that's what Rav Hutner of Yeshua Ber Salvation, that was the big nisayon of Avram. But like Rashi announced, that this whole parsha was written for Rivka. The pshat is, sure it was hard for Avram Avinu, but once he saw Rivka being produced, he said, I know exactly what this is over here. These Rivka and Rachel and Leah, they're going to be the production of the Jewish people, and that's why they're going to be part of our history. Whereas Nachar's family ends with Nachar's kids. That's all we know about them.
Wow, Rabbi, that is giving me tremendous chizuk. I have goosebumps from what you're saying. Unbelievable. Rabbi Shurin, that is a wonderful place to end this conversation. I'm so inspired by your words. I'm so inspired by talking with you today, and I'm sure that our listeners also will take this to heart and use it when they do start to feel those tough times creeping in. Now, I want to put you on the spot.
Go ahead.
That How about giving our listeners a bracha for the new year?
Okay, great. That's a great idea. And actually, I thought about it before and I really want to give say everybody should have a Gemar Chatima Tova, a year of good health, and see nachas first and foremost from our own personal growth, and then eventually our children, our grandchildren, and in some of these cases, it's going to be great-grandchildren, who are the future of the Jewish people and the next link in the chain of our never-ending work and struggle to make this world a better world. We always have to remember that. Judaism is not something private. My bracha is that you guys should see in your lifetimes, okay, how you and so many other Jewish people and families made this world a better world, right? That we are the models for that, and people look at the Jewish people for that. And that is the biggest nachas, where you have that personal growth and you have your children growing up, and there's going to be hard times. There's no question about it. But I hope my bracha will help that eventually you'll see that nachas. Because personally, I want to say, Donna, Esther and I had a lot of challenges with our kids as well. And we see such tremendous nachas with the kids. It's just wonderful to see. And I'm hoping that, I hope and pray that all the students that we have, all our alumni and all the greater Darchei Noam family, right? Just be patient. It'll all come and you'll all see it and you'll write back to us. Like, I don't know why I was impatient. I have such nachas from the children, the grandchildren, and so on and so forth.
Well, on behalf of all of our listeners, I will say a big amen to that. And Rabbi Shurin, I will give you a bracha on behalf of all of us back, that you and Esther should continue to have nachas from your family and from all of us.
Amen.
Wow. Thank you, Rabbi Shurin. If you have a question for a future episode and you want to send it our way, you can email us at questions@darcheinoam.org. That's questions@darcheinoam.org. Rebbi, I Have a Question is a podcast from Chappelle's and Midreshet Rachel V'Chaya. See you next time.
Take care, guys.